All right, Greg, here is a question from Jake. We have a few questions today about pro-life policy.
Okay.
And this first one comes from Jake. Can you discuss the principle of double effect? Is citing it a cop-out when a preborn baby does not survive delivery but mom does?
Well, the principle of double effect, also referred to as the law of double effect, which I've written on before. We have details about this on our site at str.org, um, is a principle that applies when you are facing a kind of a moral dilemma. And it's not a cop out because it's not ad hoc. It isn't like, oh, somebody just thought this up to kind of dismiss a challenge of some sort, but it is a carefully thought through ethical perspective that is meant to help us to navigate through a challenging set of ethical difficulties. Okay. The law of double effect is a ethical principle that acknowledges that some particular action is going to have two consequences, a good consequence and a bad consequence. All right. And so that's why it turns out to be a moral dilemma. All right. And in one sense, the moral dilemmas are resolved by looking at the two and trying to weigh which one, if it's a genuine moral dilemma. In other words, you have no other choices but these two, and each taken by themselves, moral dilemmas, when each taken by themselves might be bad, then you choose the one that is the less bad and the greater good, if you will. And that's how you kind of solve the dilemma. You got to choose one or the other. You choose the greater good. And you're doing a good thing when you do that. Okay, so the law of double effect is similar to that. But what it's meant to show is that there are times when you do a good thing, and you realize there's going to be a second effect that is the result of the good thing that you're doing. It becomes morally defensible, this good thing that you're doing, given two conditions. One of them is um, that you are not intending the negative effect. You are intending the good thing, and you realize a consequence of that action is going to be this negative thing, but you're not intending the negative thing. Okay. I'll give you an example on the opposite. If you have a person who is terminal and you have doctor assisted suicide, the doctor is going in not to help the person die more comfortably as a result of natural causes, but the doctor is going in to take the life. The intention of the doctor is to take the life.
Mhm.
Okay. And so that's makes it a very different kind of moral circumstance. All right. In the case of double effect, you don't intend the bad thing. You are willing to live with the bad thing that you don't intend because of the goodness of the good thing and the necessity of it, indeed. The second thing is that you're not treating in this case, when there are human beings that are involved, you're not treating them as mere means to ends, but you're treating them, you have in the consideration here that these are valuable human beings. Okay, so let's take June 6, 1944, the D-Day invasion. Okay, the D-Day invasion resulted in 30,000 civilian deaths. French. Um, did the Allied forces intend the death of those 30,000? No, they didn't intend. They intended to soften up the German defenses and make a landing to liberate Europe. Okay, but they knew it was going to happen. All right. So they intended a good thing that was absolutely necessary for the liberation of Europe and saving tens of thousands, many more, obviously millions of lives that would have been lost under the current regime. But they knew they were going to lose these lives. But these were not inconsequential. These were real human beings that had human value, and it's tragic that this took place. So here you have the law of double effect in play. We realize that the action we're going to take is well intentioned and for a good end, but it is going to have a tragic consequence. But it is morally acceptable in light of the fact that we're not trying to kill Frenchmen. We're trying to soften up the defenses so that the German army can be pushed back and France could be liberated. And we're realizing the tragedy. We're not using the people as a means to an end. We are realizing the tragedy that's involved there. Okay, so there's the general principle. It applies, and probably the question that we have actually is meant with regards to abortion. And the question is usually applied double effect when the mother's life is in danger. When the mother's life is in danger from the pregnancy, is it morally acceptable to take the life, to do the abortion, in order to save the life of the mother? And in the principle of the law of double effect, the answer is yes. But given a couple of things, obviously, the intention is to save the life. The only way to save the life is to end the pregnancy, and ending the pregnancy entails ending the life of another equally valuable human being. But it's acceptable because of what's in view here, saving the life of the mother. Now, we have to stipulate here that the mother's life has to be genuinely in danger, which is relatively rare nowadays when that's the case. And what a lot of people want to do is extend this danger to include environmental circumstances, quality of life stuff, and all that. And that doesn't enter in appropriately into this question. If the mother's life is potentially forfeit by carrying to term, and likely forfeit, then something like termination of the pregnancy, and many won't even call it an abortion because it's an inappropriate term in this circumstance because of the law of double effect. And by the way, we're not copping out here. We're trying to reason through the circumstance and make a moral distinction here between this circumstance and a whole lot of other circumstances that people try to justify that aren't justified.
And I'm not even sure there are very many, if any, situations where you actually have to do an abortion. I think where this usually comes up is when there's some sort of treatment the mother needs, that when that treatment is done, it results in the death of the baby, but they're not directly just removing the baby.
Yeah, well, that would be in the case like a chemotherapy or something. If the
Right,
woman
right.
has, well, in ectopic pregnancies, arguably at least, and I'm not a doctor, but some have told me even ectopic pregnancies the child can survive. I don't know how that works, but at least arguably this might be where the embryo attaches to the fallopian tube instead of making its full journey down into the uterus and attaching there where it can be properly cared for by the mother. So, and if the baby kind of grows there, I mean, I don't know the consequences,
They'll
but that's
both
the
die,
usual.
I think.
Yeah, and notice, thank you for mentioning that. The goal here is to save one life, not to sacrifice both. And if both are going to die, then acting in a way to save the one is morally defensible, even if it means the consequence, the foreseeable consequence of the death of the child.
And
And
there,
incidentally, by the way, even in this case, we are still treating and viewing the mother and the child as as humans that have intrinsic value.
right.
You know, we just realize, just like the Frenchmen on the coast in Normandy. So it isn't diminishing the value as many pro-abortion arguments do.
hmm
They just try to dismiss and diminish the value of the unborn in an illicit way.
And sometimes mothers will refuse treatment for things like cancer in order to save the life
That's
of
right.
their baby. So I wouldn't say it's required to do either one. So if the mother wanted to give her life for the baby, I don't think that's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also not wrong to save the life of the mother,
Correct.
especially in cases where both would die.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just wanted, Jake had linked to an article, and I just wanted to briefly say, I think you've covered all these things, but the article summarized 4 things that I think uh, bring this nicely to a close here. But here's what it said. The goal of the surgery itself must be good or at least morally neutral. So to
Mm-hmm.
save the mother's
Right.
life, to remove a tumor, whatever. I'm not calling the baby a tumor. I'm saying,
Right.
and let's say there's a tumor and it has to be, in order to remove it, the baby will die. But
Mm-hmm.
the goal is to remove the tumor,
Correct.
not to kill the baby.
Your intention has to be for the good.
Right. And then it says the good effect must not come about as a result of the evil effect but must come directly from the good action.
Mhm.
So you're not doing something evil in order to get a good result.
Mhm.
Then the evil effect must not be desired in itself, but only permitted if there is no other
Right.
choice.
That's right.
And then the fourth one is there must be a sufficiently grave reason for permitting the evil effect to occur.
Right. So notice how ethical thinkers have worked really hard to try to resolve this kind of challenge because the issue does come up. And it's not just, like I mentioned, ad hoc. We're just not, coming off the top of our head in a way to illicitly justify what people would say is an abortion under special circumstances, but not under other circumstances. And it seems to people like that this is cheating. It's not. It's a carefully thought through ethical point of view that needs to be applied when you run into very unique
Mhm.
circumstances. But both treat the unborn as the valuable human being, the unborn and the mother as the valuable human beings they are intrinsically. And that's really critical to this
Mhm.
decision.
Okay, so the next question comes from Naya, and I think you've mostly already answered this, but I wanted to ask it explicitly because I think a lot of people wonder about the pro-life view on this. So,
Mm-hmm.
here's the question. What should lawmakers do when crafting abortion policies that encompass situations where the mother has to choose between her life and the baby's life? Do you think laws should be fashioned in a way that forces women to carry those babies and die as a result? Should they induce labor?
Um, I guess I'm a little confused on the set of circumstances that are being described here. If the mother's life is in danger, the mother has the liberty to choose to carry to term and take the risk. And in fact, many women do. And one thing they discover is when women are told they'd be better off to abort than to carry to term, and they decide to carry to the term, everything works out fine. So the doctors emphasize the threat to the mother. This happens with some frequency. And I know that some people are going to say, well, you're just making this up. Look at there are lots of women that are listening to my voice right now that know when they ran into a troublesome pregnancy, troublesome of some sort, and maybe it was congenital defect of the child that they found out through amniocentesis, which some people have characterized as a search and destroy mission. You find out through amniocentesis, oh, this baby's Down syndrome. Then they know the pressure that they get from doctors to abort. A tremendous amount of pressure. I've heard this time and time and time again. So we shouldn't be surprised then when the doctors operating from a totally different set of values are going to likely overemphasize the threat to the mom regarding a troublesome pregnancy. They don't want to have, obviously problems with the mother in her health care in a troublesome pregnancy. But at the same time, I think the way to get around that is just say end the pregnancy. And so oftentimes they overemphasize the risk, and women who carry to term have a fine pregnancy and fine baby. Okay. So I think it should be up to the woman. I don't think that there's any obligation to carry a child that is a threat to the mother, a genuine threat. And this is where, where the fudge factor does come in a lot from the other side. And the threat isn't just to the life and well-being, but it's or to the life of the mother, but it's somehow to the well-being of the mother. And this is a very, very flexible concept.
Yeah,
She'll have to quit her job. Oh, we can't have that.
I've seen a lot of equivocation on the word life where instead when we say the life of the mother, they're interpreting that as quality of life
Right.
instead of actual life.
Yeah. This is actually Doe versus Bolton that followed Roe versus Wade, makes this kind of emphasis.
So I think we've already covered that we don't think that laws should require a woman to die in the place of her child, and especially that doesn't make sense in cases where they would both die.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully that will resolve that. And I don't think there are any pro-life laws out there
Mm-hmm.
that don't have an exception for the
Yeah.
life of the mother.
And incidentally, this is not the issue. This is a distraction. The issue is all of the lives of unborn children that are taken for completely different reasons. And what I think the focus is here is to try to show how mean Christians are because they won't, or pro lifers are, I should say, because they won't allow for abortion for any reason. And what they do is they focus on the hard cases to demonstrate that. Hard cases make bad policy. Okay, that's an aphorism in governance that's a sound one. Hard cases make bad policy. You do not make policy based on hard cases. You make policy based on the standard, not on the exception.
And I've also seen people argue, and I mentioned this before, but I've seen people argue that they don't actually know of any situations where you have to do a direct abortion to save a mother's
Mm,
life. It's always some other situation where you're saving the mother's life in some sort of operation that ends up in the death of the baby, but not directly.
right.
So I agree with you, Greg, that this is mostly just a distraction.